Okay. Could you please give me your full name as it is listed on your birth certificate, sir?
Jeffrey Brian Nimmo,
Okay. And where were you born at, sir?
Huntington, West Virginia.
Okay. What branch of the service were you in?
Navy.
I used to live in South Point.
Oh, wow. Across the river.
Oh, yeah. I love Huntington.
Yeah.
Okay. When did you enter the service?
December 1987.
And when did you leave the service?
June of 1995.
Okay. Were you involved in any wartime or conflict activity?
Yes.
Okay.
Persian Gulf.
Okay. And is there any battalions or units that you'd like to list that you were part of during your career?
Yes, I was attached to VFA 192 on board the USS Midway. And then I was with the Aviation Physiology and War Survival Unit at Cherry Point, North Carolina.
Aviation physiology?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
We did all the physiology training, the altitude chamber for the air crews. So we did the water survival. Our schedule was typically on Monday we did the altitude training, so we did the physiology training in the classroom and then went in the altitude chamber, basically take them up to 25,000 feet, take them off oxygen, let them see what it's like to get hypoxic. And these people are at that point in their careers are already, they've already been in aviation, so they're familiar with that because they went through it through their initial training, and this is refresher training for them. Typically on Monday we would do the physiology training, and then Tuesday through Friday we would do the water survival training.
So let's talk about the physiology just a little bit more. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in that?
It was my specialty. I was in the Navy you have what your base rate. Mine was a hospital corpsman, and I specialized first in aviation medicine. I went to school at Naval Air Station Pensacola.
Oh.
Before I went to the USS Midway with that VFA 192 is an F-18 squadron, and that's who I was attached with. And when I left, I actually flew off my ship the day of the ceasefire in the Persian Gulf, and came back and went to school for aerospace physiology, and then got stationed at the Marine Corps Air Station at Cherry Point.
So how long did school last?
The first school was around 14 weeks, and the second one I think was 10 or 12 weeks, something like that. But it was typically 5 hours a day, or 5 days a week, 9-10 hours a day. So it was
Hard.
pretty intense training. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So did you grow up in Huntington, West Virginia?
I did. Yeah. Graduated from Barboursville High School.
Uh-huh. How was your childhood?
Loved it. Yeah. Most people from Huntington love Huntington.
Yes.
So
It's a lovable city.
It is. It's a very nice city. So yeah, I had a great childhood there.
Did you go to the Keith Albee Theater anyway when you were young?
I did. Absolutely. Saw Star Wars there when it was released.
Uh-huh.
And saw practically that was the only movie theater for a long time.
Well, it's one heck of a movie theater.
It
I mean,
is.
just going in the entrance and sitting in it is a show in itself.
It's very nice. It's very nice. And then the balcony and just the whole layout of Keith Albee is real nice.
Oh, absolutely. And
Love
then, Keith, did you go to Ritter Park and some? Or?
I went to Ritter Park all the time, and I was in Huntington this weekend and went and walked down at the park for a while. So
It's beautiful.
It is
It's
beautiful.
really, really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So, any childhood memories you want to share with us? Brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have one brother who's older and one sister who's younger.
Uh-huh. How are they doing?
They're doing fantastic. My brother's he works for the Department of Homeland Security.
Here in West Virginia?
No, he's in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan,
Mhm.
and he's getting stationed in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Oh, so he'll be closer.
He will be, yeah. And my sister is still in Huntington.
Oh, she is.
Mhm.
Great. You're an uncle?
I am.
How many are you uncle to?
5.
That's good.
Yeah,
Good you know.
think
How
about
many?
Yeah, I had to think about
Yeah,
that
that's
for
right.
a minute. Yeah. Thank
So,
you.
when you got out of high school, what did you do first?
Well, I delivered pizza for Gino's Pizza, and the original Gino's on 29th Street, if you remember where that was.
That's where they started, wasn't
It
it?
was. Kenny Grant started it, and the original store was on the west side of 29th Street, and I was where we call it the old store, but it wasn't the original. The original turned into the business office. So I worked there out on 29th Street delivering pizza.
Now, Mr. Crago has it now, right?
No, Kenny Grant still owns them, but Mr. Crago franchises the Genos, I think, basically from Taze Valley over to Charleston, and then down here to Beckley. He franchises all those.
So you started out with that chain has come a long way, and I guess so have you, right?
Yeah,
How'd you like delivering pizza?
it was actually not bad at the time. You're in high school, so it was kind of fun.
Pretty good tips.
Nope.
No tips?
Nope. I delivered on the east side of Huntington, so I took 30 sub sandwiches to St. Mary's, and then I delivered to Marshall at the time to all the students who were poorer than I was. So no tips.
Oh, that's a bummer. So okay, tell us what happened next.
I went down to recruiting station and was actually signed up to go in the Army, and decided when I had signed the contract to go in the Army, I was still 17, and decided before I was supposed to go to boot camp that I didn't really want to be in the Army. So my dad had a friend of his that was an attorney, and he was actually in the Army Reserve, and he said, well, that's not a valid contract. They can't make you go. And I said, well, I don't want to go. So he went down and told the recruiter, I'm just not going. And the recruiter got mad, and he says, well, he's just not going to show up. So about 2 weeks later, I get this letter in the mail that says, you've been discharged from the delayed entry program in the Army, best of luck to you. So anyway, it was just a couple of months later, I had turned 18, and I decided that I wanted to go into the Navy.
Now, let's stop for just a second. Why was your father in the military? What was your interest in the military?
My father was not in the military. He was a police officer in Huntington. And he retired. He was the chief in Huntington when he retired.
Okay.
Yep. So I just had an interest in it, and knew I wanted to serve, and just something happened at that time. It's one of those, fate or whatever. It just wasn't where I was supposed to be. So, I don't know, just one of those feelings, and just, it's like I said, it just wasn't where I was supposed to be, and I knew it.
You've kind of lost me there. I don't really know. What do you mean?
The Army. When I went down and told him, so I said, I don't really want to do this. And at the time, I wasn't really comfortable with doing it either. And I wasn't pressured by anybody.
Right.
The recruiter, my father, anybody.
Right.
I just felt like, this was a mistake, and I need to think about this a little more. So nobody was mean about it, except the recruiter they had quotas at that time, so he was probably upset that he lost.
Don't they still have quotas?
I don't know, they may. I'm sure they probably do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So instead you enlisted in the...
Yeah, I went down and talked to the Navy recruiter and actually signed up. At that time I was 18, so I didn't need Dad's involvement. And kind of went home and told my dad, said, hey, that's something I need to tell you. And when I told him I had joined the Navy, he says, you understand, there's no, you're 18, there's no getting out of this. And I said, yep, I understand it.
How was your mom?
Oh, she was never happy about it. She was never, I won't say she wasn't supportive, because she was, but she wasn't happy about it. In fact, she probably blamed my dad for, if you weren't a police officer, or, they always wanted to be in uniform, or these kind of things. And that may have been the case. But
Well,
anyway.
Why was she unhappy, do you think?
Oh, I just don't think she wanted me to leave home at all. If I was more than 2 doors down, Mom was not going to be happy with it.
What do you think appealed to you that with the Navy that the Army didn't?
I don't know. I really don't. I just knew that I felt like I'd already burned the bridge with the Army. So I talked to the Navy guys, and it really didn't hit home that I was actually in the Navy until I was at boot camp, and we had to do our water survival training and, tie off our dungaree pants and, try to make flotation devices and all these things. It really didn't hit home that I was going to be in the middle of the ocean, until sometime in boot camp. So, or that I had the potential to be stationed, out in the middle of the ocean.
Had you had any experience in the ocean before? I mean,
No, I'd only been to the ocean one time. Yeah.
Myrtle Beach?
Nope, it was Nag's Head.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So where did you go for basic?
I went to Great Lakes, Illinois, which is just north of Chicago. Yeah, I got there December 18th and graduated at the end of February, so boot camp was cold. You always hear about these folks that go into Paris Island and Fort Benning and all these places for boot camp, and no matter when they went, everybody, it was the hottest time of the year, and they had sand fleas and all this. We had none of that. In fact, we were lucky to be able to stand up to go from where we slept at in our barracks to the galley, where we were going to eat. And we had to tie towels around our faces. The wind chill was, in the minus 40s and minus 50s at times. It was just incredibly cold. And of course, we all look like idiots when we march because, you're trying to march in formation and the first guy falls and it's just dominoes. So, the company commander was screaming at us because we were so stupid, everybody falling and all that. It's kind of comical after you're out of it and you look back on it. But, Great Lakes was a nice place.
So were you in pretty good shape when you went? Were you able to hold up well?
I played football for Barbersville, and so I was in good shape my senior year. And then I ate too much at Geno's between when I graduated and when I went to boot camp. So I wasn't in great shape when I got to boot camp, but I was in decent shape, the 9 weeks later. So
I guess the food was, at least the food, you didn't get many tips, but the food was great.
Yeah, we got a discount. Don't tell Mr. Grant that, but we got a discount.
So what happened after basic? Where to next?
I went to I went to Hospital Corpsman, which is literally just across the bridge.
Now, did you have a choice in that, or you were assigned?
I did. I had, when I signed up, I did want to be a hospital corpsman, and I'd been on the volunteer fire department there as a junior member, if you will.
In Huntington?
Yes, sir. And I had an interest in emergency medical services and those type of things. Mm-hmm. And I was pretty certain at that point. That was one of the times when it just felt right. I was telling you, the Army thing, it just didn't feel right, and that felt right. I knew I wanted to be a hospital corpsman, and I felt like I could be pretty good at it. So I went to Hospital Corps School, which was just across literally across the bridge from in Great Lakes, where you go from the Recruit Training Command, which is basic training, to the Naval Training Center, which is where they have some of the Navy calls A schools. So I went across the bridge and went to school there.
What was it like?
Loved it. Had a great time there. Really did. We still had physical training practically every morning, and we had a lot of classroom work. Keep in mind, a lot of hospital corpsmen are, on ships. They may or may not have a lot of medical support there with them. The training was fantastic training. I just loved it. I loved Hospital Corps School. It was a lot of fun.
Did you have any particular mentors or people that stuck out in your mind in that era that kind of showed you the ropes, or that you learned especially a lot from, or were inspired by?
Not really. I liked both of my instructors at Corps School, and we had a lieutenant that was assigned to us as well. The two instructors, the primary instructors, were hospital corpsmen. One was a chief petty officer, the other was a first class petty officer. So they'd been, they were experienced, and they had been in their profession for a number of years. Very good at what they did. So none of them, I think all of them, kind of stood out, to be honest with you. They were just, and at that point, I was very young, and these folks had been in the Navy for quite some time and seemed to know everything about everything. So I think everybody kind of stood out in that manner,
Mm-hmm.
But and I looked up to them. They did a great job with our class, I think.
So so how long were you in school there?
I started I think the first week of March, and finished maybe the end of May or early June, something like that.
So then what happened? Did you get orders?
I did. I got orders to go to more advanced training and go to what we call C School, and that's when I went to the Naval Air Station at Pensacola and went through Aviation Medicine School. But I had a delay between the time that I got to Pensacola and when my class started. So I got to Pensacola around June or July of '88, and my class didn't start up until I think February or March in '89, something like that.
I want to go back for just a second. So you were assigned to go on ahead and get more education.
Mm-hmm.
Were many people assigned that, or was that kind of a reward for your propensity for this field?
Both. A lot of people out of Corps School did go on to advanced training. I had finished, I think it was in the top 10% at the time, so I basically went from, I did go from an E1 on our pay scale to an E4. So I skipped 2 grades and I was in what was called the advanced technical field. And I had to agree to do another year with the Navy in order to get that promotion and to get to school.
Mm-hmm.
So,
But you were following, basically.
yes, and I really didn't want to do that at that time. So there were maybe, I had a class of around 40, and I'm thinking there may have been 5 or 6 of us that fell into that category, something like that. Maybe not that many.
So, wow, that must have been a great feeling.
It was because the guys in my class that were like the class leaders were E3s because they had some college before they came into the Navy, so they got credit for that and weren't starting out at the bottom like I was. So on Thursday I was an E1, and then on Friday when we graduated I was an E4. So I outranked him at that point. He'd been bossing me around for 12 weeks or where it was. So that was kind of funny.
Did the thought of a little payback cross your mind?
No, it did. He was a great guy. One guy in particular that was our class leader. Plus he was, twice my size. He had played college football for 2 years and then and came in the Navy and was just a super nice guy. So there was no payback. I don't think I would have paid him back much anyway.
Uh-huh.
So,
the gap that happened then, what did that mean in terms of your progression?
It really, there wasn't any progression in that time. It was just waiting on the class convening date.
And how long did you have to wait?
I got there in June or July, I can't remember the exact date, and started class again in February or March. So 7-8 months.
So what did you do in that time period?
Went and got the mail. Basically whatever I worked in the administrative office, made copies.
Beat in time.
Yeah, really. Played softball on the command softball team and, just hung out for a while, I guess.
Were you bored or was it enjoyable or a little of both?
It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. So much that I really wanted to stay in Pensacola because Pensacola is just an awesome place.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, it's one of those things we would call a Navy town. If you're in the service and you're in Pensacola, it's just a great place to be.
Yeah.
The town caters to the Navy as well they should because the whole, the Navy is that town.
Right.
And we were really close to the Blue Angels, and you could go out 2 or 3 days a week, watch the Blue Angels practice. And, we got to eat at their galley if we went down there. And, the Blue Angels food was always better than everybody else's food. So it was just a neat place. I really loved it. I remember calling my mom in December. And at that time in Huntington, it seemed like the winters were worse than what they are now.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember calling my mom from Pensacola in December and telling her I was playing softball, in the middle of December. And that just seemed so strange, because we were wearing shorts and, playing ball. And anyway, we kind of laughed about that. But it was a neat place. Loved it.
So how long did the next class last?
The next one was, I think, late February, early March, and I finished up in May, sometime toward the end of May. And I went on leave for a couple, and that was at the end of that class. I got orders and went overseas and was stationed on with VFA 192 on the USS Midway.
Now, I assume at various points you went home and visited West Virginia.
Not much. I went home for Christmas when I was stationed at Pensacola, and then I went home again around in June before I went to Japan. And it
How did it feel to come home?
felt great. Yeah.
Were you? I'm just sort of curious. We've asked a few people this. Did you ever get teased about your West Virginia roots?
I never did. People, that was the thing about boot camp, and you're going through all these schools, and even at your duty stations, there were literally people from all walks of life, everywhere. Some people that had very well-to-do parents and had some college, to people that didn't even know who their parents were, and were basically in the military because they were trying to stay out of jail. And some of those people that you wouldn't think do well in the Navy absolutely did fantastic. And some of those that you would have put money on at the beginning and said, this person's going to do outstanding, ended up not doing very well. I mean, it was just, and I don't remember ever, any of, we joke around and stuff like that, but I don't ever really, in a serious way, making fun of or anything like that.
It's interesting to me that the way you talk about that, the diversity of people that were in the military now. Do you think we still have that today in the modern military?
I would assume probably more so. I don't know, because it's been 15 years, 16 years now since I separated. But we had, and on my ship we had folks that were from the Philippines. They weren't United States citizens, and we had guys, and at that time, when I say guys, I do mean that not gender neutral. Most of that time, like my duty station on board the ship, females were not. They didn't serve in those roles at that time. So we had guys from the Philippines and Thailand that were serving on active duty, and in addition to folks from just all over the United States from different backgrounds. It was pretty neat.
Now, the Philippines, they're what to us in the United States? We're a protectorate of them, or what is our relationship exactly?
I don't think we actually have. I'm not the expert on this.
I'm not either.
But we had two bases there. We had, I guess there were some Air Force operations there too. The big Navy bases were at Subic Bay and for the naval station, and there was air operations were run out of Cuba Point, and that's where we went to most of the time. So we had some kind of status of a forces agreement, which the Philippines elected around 92 or 93. They elected not to renew. So those bases basically, we pulled out all of our assets at that time, which is shortly after I left in 91. So that was just after I left.
So you went to school, you finished another round. What new skills did you learn at that level?
Aviation Medicine. And like in Hospital Corpsman, we do a lot of trauma, basic Hospital Corpsman type stuff, even how to maintain a medical record, the administrative type duties. And then in Aviation Medicine, we learned how to conduct flight physicals and a lot of anatomy and physiology on the ENT, ears, nose, and throat, how to deal with those type of injuries. That was essentially it.
Sounds like pretty intellectual work.
It was, yeah. It was important, and the pilots and their health is something obviously extremely important. So having accurate physicals, and we did all the blood work, and
so you had pilots. You were having pilots pass by you regularly.
Oh, every day.
Every day you help conduct physicals of them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we did their sick call. So, we started off at 7 in the morning, and if they had, whatever ailments, we took care of those, and we did the physicals. It was basically, everything medically we took care of.
But you were under a doctor, is that how that worked?
We were, yeah.
Okay, like almost like a physician's assistant, would that be
I wouldn't say that we were at physician's assistant level. We did write our own prescriptions. The flight surgeons usually countersigned those. The Hospital Corpsman wrote for prescriptions up to and including antibiotics. We didn't write for anything that was controlled.
Right.
And that was basically, a lot of that was on the job training, just learning what the protocols were, what the flight surgeons wanted treated. There are certain things, probably 90% of things, if people show up at sick call, runny nose, sore throat, these type of things, you don't have to be a doctor to take care of those. And we were able to do that. Keep in mind, they didn't really have the ability either to get over-the-counter stuff. Because we didn't have much of a store on base there, and so Tylenol and Sudafed, and aspirin, and those type of things were given out by prescription by the corpsman. So when we say prescriptions, probably 90% of those were things that you would get over the counter anywhere else.
So after Pensacola, did you end up on a ship?
I did, yep, the USS Midway.
That was your first ship?
Yes, sir.
And what year was that?
1989.
So what did it feel like to actually, for a Huntington boy, to actually be on a big ship?
I can't put it into words. The first time I got there, and we pulled out probably a month later.
From where?
From Yokosuka, Japan.
Mm-hmm.
The Air Wing was stationed in Atsugi, Japan. The ship was in Yokosuka, Japan. And we pulled out, like I said, probably a month after I got there. And we went on, it was just, maybe a 2 or 3 month cruise. But the first day, the petty officer, the leading petty officer for all the corpsmen, he says, "Hey, look, you guys, if this is your first deployment, you can go up to the hangar deck and watch us pull out, and we don't want you to miss all that, because we were below decks at Maine Medical." So, I was really thankful that he let us do that. And we were standing up where the elevator's at. And it's basically, if you look at an aircraft carrier, there's the flight deck level, which you're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a hangar deck where all the maintenance is done. And there's elevators that go from that raise the aircraft from the hangar deck up to the flight deck. And we were just standing out on one of those elevators, and kind of watching the whole thing, and that was one of those aha moments too, because we finally got out there, and we just I went from one end of the ship and kind of looked, and did that number and looked, and there was nothing but water. Went to the back of the ship, the fantail, and looked around, and there was nothing but water. And went to the other side of the ship and looked around, and there was nothing but water. And that's when it really hit me, and I kept thinking, why does this thing even float? This is a very heavy ship, and for that first 2 days, I just kept asking everybody I saw, why aren't we sinking? And, so.
Oh, that's great.
It was interesting. It was it was a neat 2 days. And then, like I said, we stayed out for a couple months and just did flight ops, and they let the pilots get their landings and takeoffs in that they need for their proficiencies, and we call them shakedown cruises. Everybody go inventory all the first aid boxes, and make sure just everything is operationally ready. So people kind of forget about this, the whole purpose of being there, and I think at that point that's when the taxpayers were getting their money out of me, because I was actually doing what I had been trained to do at that point. So that's what those cruises were for.
Initially, did you have any trouble with any seasickness or anything like that?
I did not one time, and I treated many people that had that. Usually treating them, that means I sat them down and told them how sorry I felt for them, that they were seasick, because usually by the time they got to us, they had already been sick, and at that point, too late. So
Do people usually get used to it, or how did that play out?
they do, yeah.
And it's rough seas that makes people sick, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, I think usually the first, regardless of what the seas were like, usually the first couple of, maybe the first week, the first few days, those people that are going to get sick usually get sick.
Just because they're on the water?
Just because they're on the water. And you don't think that an aircraft carrier really moves much, but it does. Now it doesn't move like the smaller ships, I'm not saying that, but it rolls. And just, drop a little piece of, something in your bath water and make a ripple on it, and that's what that aircraft carrier does. You're talking about a pretty big ocean,
Mhm.
and a, relatively speaking, pretty small ship. So it rolls, and people get sick, and like I said, you just tell them how sorry you feel for them, and that was about it.
So carry on with your story. Tell us what happened next.
Well, we just, we went on cruises. The first long cruise I went on, we went to the Philippines. That was usually our first stop out of Yokosuka. Was I think every cruise I was on, we stopped at the Philippines first, and then we stopped at Hong Kong. And I remember getting to Hong Kong and trying to find out. No, that was in 1990. In 1990, we stopped in Hong Kong, and I was a Cincinnati Reds fan, being from Huntington, and the Reds were playing the A's in the World Series, and I kept trying to find out, how the Reds were doing in the World Series, which they did very well that year. But in '89, the first cruise we went on, we went to Hong Kong. We did go to Hong Kong. I think we went there twice. Philippines, Thailand. We hit Singapore. I went to Perth, Australia, which is on the western side of Australia. And,
Let's stop for a second. So when you got to Japan,
yeah.
that was your first deployment outside the United States, true?
Yes, sir.
So, obviously you went and explored.
Hmm.
What was that like?
Weird. It was weird. And what you were telling me, I was thinking about that when, I think it may have been before we even sat down, but my experience in Japan was that the older folks did not like us, and the younger people did. Keep in mind that was before, and I think that incident you were talking about may have happened during my time there or shortly thereafter, but and my contact with them was kind of limited too, because while I was in Japan for 2 years, most of that time we were at sea. But we usually got on the train and went from Atsugi down to Yokosuka. And they weren't rude. In fact, I would say that the Japanese folks were probably some of the most polite people I've ever met. And when I say the older folks didn't like us, they weren't overt about it. But you could just tell, they would look at you and kind of look the other way. And the younger population at that time was very open with us. When we opened the base up and had, where we welcomed the community in and we let them see the base and what was going on there and all those things, it was the younger people. They always had a bunch of questions and just loved being there. It was a really fun time. But the older generation, probably for some good reasons.
Did you ever hear anybody mention at all Hiroshima or Nagasaki?
Not one time.
Or even World War II?
No, sir. Not one time. Like I said, they weren't really overt about it, and maybe it was just kind of paranoia. Maybe me thinking that they, but my impression was that the younger population was much more open to us than what and that may just be a generational thing too. That like in the United States, the older generation is much more conservative than what the younger generation is, no matter what year it is. That's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. And so maybe there was some of that going on as well.
So in the Philippines and in Japan, when you went off base, what did you see? How did you entertain yourself? It had to be very exotic to you.
It was. Well, in the Philippines, and the Philippines is a very neat place. And everybody that I encountered overseas, and I can say this without any hesitation, the people were fantastic to us. I didn't get any of this ugly American stuff, not one time. And in the Philippines, I'll tell you, that, and it's no secret, the first town, literally, essentially, when you get off base, is bars, tattoo parlors, and t-shirt shops. I mean, that's what it is, which was kind of funny because the Navy always told us to stay out of the bars and tattoo parlors, but they kept pulling us into these places that were nothing but bars and tattoo parlors. So I don't know how we were supposed to do that unless we were going to beam ourselves to somewhere else. But anyway, that's the ports that the Navy hit. It's just a fact of life. I don't know if that's still the way it is, but it's the way it was for the years I was in, and according to everybody else that was in the Navy long before me, the way it has been since the dawn of the U.S. Navy. But the people there were just extremely nice. And when you look at it, the thing that really struck me about it was no matter what country we went to, probably with the exception of Singapore, which is the cleanest place on earth, people here don't realize how good we have it. The poorest of our people would be living like kings in most of the rest of the world, with rare exceptions. So, and that was one of the things whenever we would get out of the immediate area of whatever port we were in, and we would drive around, I mean, you would literally see people living in almost, if you had any survival training, what we would call a lean-to or a debris hut, and that's their home. And cable TV and VCRs and cell phones and all that kind of stuff. Of course, we didn't have a lot of cell phones at that time, but the things that we kind of took for granted here, air conditioning, and you're talking in the Philippines, a place much hotter than most except the extreme south of the United States. They didn't have those kind of things. Just getting their next meal sometimes was a big deal. So that was something that really struck me in a lot of the places that we went to.
Did you sample the foods?
I did.
And how'd you like the foods?
Loved it. We just had, quote, meat on a stick, and it was always good. Like most sailors, usually there was some beverages that happened before that whenever we pulled into these ports, and it kind of may have tainted made everything taste good. But the meat was it was fine. In fact, it's kind of funny. The only time that I got sick in the Philippines was I had to stand watch on base on the flight line one day, and there was this little I don't know, like these little trucks that have sandwiches and sodas and stuff like that. So that truck came out to the flight line and was giving everybody everybody that was stuck there. That's where you were getting your lunch from. And I had 2 hot dogs and a Mountain Dew, and I was sick for 4 days. I'd eaten out in town. Probably I visited the Philippines, 14 times, never got sick on anything out in town. I was a corpsman. I used to train on that stuff, and say, don't drink the water, drinks with ice in it, and all these kind of things. Never got sick on anything out in town, but ate on base one time and was sick for 4 days.
You touched on something. I'm just going to go back to it just for a minute. It may be nothing, but obviously you're a sweet man. But in any of your experience in the military, did you ever see any Americans acting ugly?
I don't think so. No. The places where I was, like I said, they really received us well, even in Japan. And we went out in town and we ate in the restaurants. I think people were very sensitive to the fact that we were guests. And we did try, there were times that, Shore Patrol was out in town and people, would be no different than being on 4th Avenue in Huntington on a Friday or Saturday night, and, college students there hanging out in bars, and, sailors hanging out in bars out in town, and, Shore Patrol would have to go hit them over the head and bring them back to the base, But I don't think that was really that didn't happen often, but I don't remember any instance where we were.
Just some boys drinking too much.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so moving forward in your story, what would you like to tell us next?
Well, basically from that first cruise, the real significant thing happened on that cruise was that I crossed the equator. And that's when you go from being a polywog in the Navy to being a shellback. Now I understand nowadays they've changed this initiation considerably. But when I went through it, and for the 300 years prior, it didn't have the emotional effect on people it does nowadays, I guess. But you had to go through this initiation when you crossed the equator, which basically you got your rear end kicked for about 14 hours. But it was fun. There were different parts of that, and started out down on below decks and ended up on the flight deck.
Well, tell us about a piece or two of it.
Well, we had what was called a shillelagh line and I really don't, because the initiation's kind of supposed to be a surprise for those people who haven't been through it. But I'll tell you one or two parts that I think are probably widely known. But there's this shillelagh line that are basically cut off fire hoses about this long, and there's people lined up, maybe 10 yards, and there's two lines, and you have to duck walk, backwards through this line, and they, spank you as you're going through to kind of punish you for your bad deeds. And it sounds goofy, but it's a ton of fun, believe it or not. And if one person that's in that line tells you to go back through, you have to go back through. So of course the corpsman, nobody wanted to make the corpsman mad, so we always went straight through. Some other people weren't so fortunate. They had 2 or 3 trips to the altar, so to speak. So that was one part, and then there was, up on the flight deck, there was just this big container of stuff, and that's what it was. It contained, old food, and it's just this green liquid. I don't even know what it was, and you basically had to swim, maybe 10 feet, 12 feet from one end of this thing and to the other one, and once you got through the end of it, they spray you down with water hoses and that type thing.
Sounds like some of our modern TV shows, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and there's, that goes on for about 14 hours. So it started around 4 o'clock in the morning, and we went till about 6 in the evening, something like that. Nobody was hurt. There wasn't any of that kind of nonsense, It was, and everybody that had been through it would tell you that they would. In fact, I have a card in my wallet that says I went through it. And most of the people who've been through that, they would never take it back, and it's optional. People that did not want to go through it were not forced to do so.
So this is a little bit off the topic, but we haven't touched on it at all. Any romance in all this time period for you, or not so much?
I'm married.
You're married.
I am now. Yes.
You are now, but I mean,
Yeah.
back then, did you?
Yeah.
When you were in Pensacola, did you
Yeah.
date, or?
I would rather not go into those
Okay,
subjects.
that's no problem.
Yeah.
So you're married, and do you have children?
I do. Yeah.
How many kids do you have?
1.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a daughter who's 7.
Oh, 7.
Yeah.
What's her name?
Anna.
Anna. Great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, you're now here to, we'll loop back here, but you left the military when?
95.
And what happened then?
I went to college at Marshall,
Oh, that's
and
appropriate.
I had went through, when I was at Cherry Point, I'd went through an off-campus program from Southern Illinois, and I had about 16 hours to finish up my bachelor's degree. And so I went back home and lived with my parents and took those courses at Marshall, and ended up transferring them to Southern Illinois. So my undergraduate degree is actually from Southern Illinois.
Mhm.
And sent out 200 and some applications, and just really couldn't find anything to do.
What kind of work would a person leaving the field you had been in?
Yeah.
What kind of work would you be looking for?
Well, we were trained by the Navy, and we always, we rode on the ambulances, we did a lot of things in the Navy. I did sutures and IVs without a doctor's order. There's no way that they allow people to do that in the private sector. So what we were allowed to do on ship and when we were on deployment, there is no civilian equivalence. There are, but it's kind of a mix of, some nursing stuff, some paramedic type stuff. But when you get into the civilian sector, unless you're licensed to do that, you can't do that. Oh, excuse me. So it was difficult. It came out, and my bachelor's degree was in healthcare management. And it was really tough to get into that, still is. And I put job applications in everywhere.
Even including the VA hospital in Huntington?
I did, yes, sir.
I would have thought maybe you would have caught a break there.
Yep.
Didn't happen.
Didn't happen. And I guess it was around probably the midsummer of '97, and I went back down to Old Main at Marshall and had picked up a graduate school catalog and was walking out of Old Main, and there was an older gentleman there with a USS Coral Sea hat on, and he was in a wheelchair. And the Coral Sea was our sister ship. So when I passed by him, I said, I wouldn't be caught dead with that hat on, or something like that. And he says, well, you little, son of a gun, come over here and talk to me. So we sat there and talked for, probably 20, 25 minutes. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm, thinking about applying to graduate school. I had a lot of GI Bill benefits left because I'd only had to take 16 hours. And it turns out he was the chair of the Occupational Health and Safety Department there at Marshall, and he was an Army veteran, had landed a helicopter on the Coral Sea. His name was Dr. Keith Berenklauw. And he said, well, why don't you come in my program? And I said, okay. Pretty much that simple. And he says, we're getting ready to start classes here in a couple weeks. So, if you need an override to get in the class or whatever, come see me. So of course I went down to the registrar's office, and every class that I needed was full. And so I went down and saw him, and he signed this thing and took it back down to him, and magically the class was not full. And so I got into class there, and finished up the program in '99. He actually left after, I think, and he got very sick after the first, maybe either after the first semester or the second semester of graduate school.
So you got that degree.
Mm-hmm. I did.
And then what?
Went to work, working in safety for an industrial contractor in South Carolina, in Gaffney, South Carolina, a small town just outside of Spartanburg. Great place, fantastic people. Everywhere I've been, people were just neat. It's just different. But I think most of the places I've been, people were just good people. And so I had a great time down there, and was working a lot. And 2 years before that, I had applied for a job at the Asheville VA. And I don't even know how they got that number, because I was living in Huntington at the time, but sometime during my time in the chief engineer at the VA in Asheville called me and says, hey, were you still interested in this job with the VA? And I said, what job with the VA? And he says, well, you had applied for this job working in safety here with us. So I said, yeah, that was 2 years ago. And he said, well, we're just now getting around to filling the job. So anyway, I didn't ask him about salary or anything. I just wanted to know, because I was making decent money at that time. And I just asked him how many hours a week were we going to work. And he said, well, we generally work 40, which was true for the most part. And then that's when I came into the VA as a permanent employee, was sometime in 2000. Yeah.
Now, you were in the Persian Gulf, true?
Yes, sir, it was.
So tell us about that. How did you come to be in the Persian Gulf, and what was it like for you?
Well, I was on the ship, and it was going to be one of the final cruises, maybe the final cruise for the Midway. I can't remember. But we were supposed to go back to Australia on the eastern side at Sydney, and then go to Hobart, Tasmania, stop in Hong Kong and Singapore. And for sailors, I'm telling you, this is a dream trip, you know. So we were all excited about this. And then I can't remember the timing, but I remember the captain coming on basically and telling us, you know, we've had a change in plans, that we're not going to all these wonderful ports as this farewell tour for this decorated ship, that we were going to go into the Persian Gulf. So that was disappointing, to say the least. So we did still hit a couple of ports on the way out. That was when we hit Hong Kong, and I was trying to find out how the Reds were doing in the World Series. And I think we stopped in Thailand at Pattaya Beach on the way out, and then made it into the Persian Gulf, and probably sometime in early November, maybe, something like that. And then we basically just practiced for the next couple of months until I think we actually started dropping bombs in the middle of January, something like that.
So that was a whole different experience. It was the first wartime experience.
It was. You know, we had seen casualties, and we had you know, things happen underway, and you know, there are things that happen when people are practicing. I mean, it's
Accidents.
It's not a thing for children. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a very serious business, and we did have accidents. So we had those type of things. But yeah, as far as actual war, you know, this was the first exposure to that, and we didn't know what was going on. You know, we kept, and I was working the flight deck at this time as a hospital corpsman, and you know, we would load all these bombs, and the aircraft would take off, and then they would come back, and they would still have bombs attached to them. So, and we really didn't know what was going on. And then, and we were doing this throughout the day and night. So, you know, we weren't really clued in as to when we knew it was going to happen. It was just a matter of what the timing was going to be. And I think it may have been thinking it was around the 16th of January, the 15th or 16th of January. And it was 2 o'clock in the morning, our time. So I don't know what time that was here. And, you know, we were up there, and all of our planes took off, of course, with a lot of bombs. And I was kind of a senior petty officer at that time, at least as far as being on that ship. And I'd picked up second class, and there were a couple guys that had just gotten there and were up there talking, and they said, well, you know, you think this is the start of it? And I said, well, you know, if these aircraft, if they don't have the bombs on when they come back, you pretty much know they dropped them somewhere. And we were standing out on the flight deck, and we looked up, and there were just basically wing to wing these anti-collision lights flashing, you know, and it went across the entire horizon. So we pretty much thought at that point that whatever was going to start was starting. And of course, you know, later on, early morning, the aircraft started coming back, and indeed, there was nothing on their wings, and we knew that it had started at that point. And I think the captain came on at some point around there and told us, you know, what was going on. So that was that experience, and then that kind of went on basically nonstop. You know, until just the aircraft and the pilots, they just switched them out, refueled them, and reloaded them, and it was just unbelievable the amount of ordnance that was launched off the aircraft carriers, and yeah, and we were just one of 6, not counting all the Air Force aircraft and all that stuff too. So, and then. I had already received orders to get to class in Pensacola, and I can't remember the timing, but literally the day that we had the ceasefire, there were a handful of us, and you know,
Sorry to interrupt you.
so it was like, we flew off the ship and went to Fajara. And that was where something that happened that was really interesting. We got there, and of course me and the guy that transferred off the ship with me, the other foreman, we got to, I think it was a Holiday Inn in Fujara, and we were going to have to stay the night there. And of course that was the first night we'd had in some time, and we look over and there was this little lounge there. So we said, you know, let's head over to the lounge. And we sat there and we had, you know, a drink or something there with us, and these folks with traditional Arabic, you know, the headgear and robes and those type of things came up, and you know, at that point we didn't really know much about what was going on off our ship, and we didn't know if we were in trouble or what was going on. They came up and asked us if we were Americans, and I knew with my, you know, Barboursville Huntington accent, there wasn't going to be any way to really say anything otherwise. So we said, yeah, sure, we're Americans, and they started slapping us on the back, you know, and saying, oh, thank you very much, and all these kind of things, and it's kind of funny. The next thing we knew, there were just, you know, every single one of them, there were just these shots of Jim Beam lined up in front of us, you know, and these guys from Fujara, you know, bought us all these drinks, and we're going, oh my God, there's no way we could, thanks guys, but please, you know, stop. And the next thing we knew, you know, we looked out and they had this big window, and there were just these line of cars coming past the hotel, honking and waving, and they had these Kuwaiti and American flags, and they were all waving at us. You know, so we're waving back.
Wow.
Yeah, that was pretty neat. And then everything else was kind of uneventful, you know, just flying back, getting back to the States. And it was the first time I hadn't been back since I left, so that was, you know, right, just under 2 years, probably about 20 months, something like that.
Were you guys able to drink all the alcohol?
I don't remember.
Maybe then.
I think we gave it our best shot. I don't know.
Did you take any pictures aboard the ship? Or
I did, and I've got a bunch of them. I don't have them here with me. You know,
we'll be here tomorrow too, if you might.
I can bring
And
some
maybe
in.
again, we'll probably be here again down the road.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, I can bring some in.
Yeah,
certainly.
that'd be great. So how long have you been here at the Beckley facility, and how did you come to be here?
Around 10 years. I was working in a safety specialist job at Asheville, and shortly after I got there, the safety manager's job opened up here, and I applied for it and got it, and then worked in. I was the chief of facilities here too, and then I became the facilities planner, and then when the associate director's job opened up here, I got the associate director's job. So I've kind of
What does the associate director do?
I'm over everything in the hospital essentially that's non-clinical. So all the administrative services, engineering, fiscal, human resources.
So are you one of Karen McGraw's right-hand people?
I am yeah,
You are the
Yeah.
right-hand person.
pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
With, you know, she's got chief of staff that handles the physicians and a lot of the clinical issues, and then we have a nurse exec that handles, you know, the nursing staff.
By all accounts, and I'm sure you deserve some credit for this, but the Beckley facility seems to have come a very, very, very long way. Is that your experience?
Yes. Yeah, and part of that has just been, you know, the VA's come a long way too. You know, it's a different, when I got out in '95, the reception I got at the VA wasn't great. Just be honest about it. And I kind of made it a goal, as much as I could influence, that when I got into the VA, I was going to make sure that other people didn't have that same experience. And I think there's a lot of changes that have happened, you know, just different programs have been able to take place in the VA, and you know, we're literally kind of leading the country in a lot of issues: traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress.
Meaning Beckley is?
Not Beckley, the VA.
Oh, the VA. As a whole.
As a whole, yeah. And then Beckley is part of that, because, we're providing those services for the folks in the 11 counties in southern West Virginia. So, it's and then when you have such a high percentage of veterans, and then, everybody here, the employees, they really have an attachment, not only to the building and to their job, but to the veterans as well.
So how's it feel for a Huntington boy who joined the Navy to end up back in his home state serving in Beckley, West Virginia's hospital?
I'm pretty proud. It's really neat. And if you would have asked me when I got out of the Navy if I'd be doing what I am now, I would have told you that there's no way. When I got out of my safety program at Marshall, I wanted to be the safety manager at the VA in Huntington, which is a great job. And things, it was kind of just like what happened to me in the military, I kind of fell into that role of I was supposed to go to San Diego, and the guy that was going to the Midway in Yokosuka failed his overseas screening, and they came to me 2 days before and said, this is an arduous tour, we have to have somebody we can trust, which ultimately ended up being a great compliment. But, we've got to get somebody there that can do this, and you've got to go. So I went. And, everything just kind of fell in place. And none of it did I really, try to make happen. And it was just kind of weird how everything happened to get to where I'm at now.
And to what do you attribute that?
God. I think he's looking out for me. I think for whatever reason, certainly didn't deserve it. I don't know. And there have been a lot of people, and I think every person would say this at some point in their career, there were a lot of people that looked out for them. And, you can look back and say, if so-and-so didn't do this, or so-and-so didn't do this, if this person didn't believe in me, I would be still, taking peaches around for Mr. Grant, and not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just, there were different things that were supposed to happen, I guess.
Okay.